Hallelujah. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Today, you see the schedule. Monday's the nation, Tuesday's the church, Wednesday's marriage. Today's my life. And I'm sharing what God has done in my life. That's your most powerful testimony you'll ever have of the power of God, is what he's done in your life. Last Thursday, we were finishing up, and I was on my way home, and I was sharing with you how I actually tried to kill myself, not commit suicide. But if you heard last week, you knew I was 50 feet away from what would have been total death and ended my life at when I would have been about 21, 22 years old at that point in my life. And as hard as I tried, God just put his hand and kept me from doing what I so desperately wanted to do. Had I been able to have my will, my way, I wouldn't have been here today. In fact, I would have been gone when I was about 21 years old. 20, yeah, about 21. So you can listen next week or last week and hear what happened. But that was maybe the first time in my life that God literally delivered me from death, which should have been, it was the providence of God. And that night I was flying back from Fort Polk and then on into Colorado Springs as I was on my way now to Vietnam. And that was, those were days of testing. I was reading Peter, just First Peter earlier, how that there's many trials, various trials. We all go through trials. We're constantly going through trials, and that's precious in God's sight. He says that's more valuable than gold. Just think, if you could get gold every day, would that make you happy? Well, the trials you have should make you happy, because the testing of your faith is more valuable than gold. It's being laid up in heaven. When you're tested, when you're tried, if you exercise faith and you endure the test, you live through the test. Well, I was being tested. People were going to Vietnam those days, and many were coming back in body bags. And I was just that night, as I was flying into Colorado Springs, where I was going to have my a little break before I was sent over to Vietnam, I was just praying and committing my time to God. And it's just so amazing in our life. So often, when just normal life goes on, we don't have sometimes the intimacy of God, because it's so easy, especially, well, whether you're young or old. It seems like maybe when you're young, but I don't know if it makes any difference. With life, you don't face death. You don't think about eternity. And it's not trying to face death to be doom and gloom. It's heaven. It's forever. Uh, and I like what Jim Elliot one time said. He said, he's no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Well, God had worked in my life, and I saw a lot happen. As you know, if you heard my testimony in Fort Polk, we saw people saved. I was baptizing. That's where I met Dennis. We would walk for miles and pray and share the vision of how God wants to reach the world in our generation, and how he gave a simple, clear plan. The New Testament church, not like the traditional church is functioning today, but the way it did in the New Testament, which is so unique and so multiplying and so building and so glorifying to God. Well, that night I got into Colorado Springs, and I had about 2 weeks. It was during the Christmas time, and I had about 2 weeks at home, and that was a kind of a special time. Not really knowing at the time. If you've never been in this situation, you can't probably gender on the emotions you have, realizing I might not see my mom, my dad, my family. This may be the last time I see them. And we finally embraced as I left after that break. And then I was on the long flight over to Vietnam. And I never will forget, as I was flying over the Pacific Ocean, praying to God and just being moved in my spirit, not having any idea what God was going to do with me. I mean, he totally had control. I couldn't make any choices. Once you were in the military, you don't make any choices. It's just like, really, if you're in God's army, if you come under the captain of your salvation, you should make no choices. He tells you where to go, what to do. As Jesus said to Peter, he said, You'll go where you don't want to go, and you'll be clothed with someone else will clothe you. Everything will be directed in your life. Somebody's directing your life. You're either doing it, Satan's doing it, the world's doing it, the flesh is doing it, or Jesus Christ is doing it. And when he's doing it, you know it's going to happen. I was just believing God even then for great and mighty things. I didn't know. Maybe he'd put me in prison camp and allow me to be tested in that way and become known as a prisoner of war and be able thereby through that problem be able to speak to many people. Or maybe he'd just have me shot in front of a company. I just didn't know. I don't know what was going to happen. But I do remember going over the ocean just thinking, God, I couldn't even kill myself when I left Fort Polk. I couldn't even do something that would have killed me. And I thought, God, you've got control. If I can't kill myself, no Vietnamese could kill me. If I can't even do it to myself, if your hand is so much on me. And I was reading through 1 Peter, and I never will forget. I got to chapter 3, and as I was finishing down through chapter 3, and it was the King James translation in the late 60s. That was the main translation. And that's what I was reading from. And next to the last verse, it says, the like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. By the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is gone into heaven and is on the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers being made subject unto him. Now, I don't know what that verse means to you. I don't know if you've ever even seen that verse before. But as I was over the Pacific Ocean, knowing in a few hours I was going to land in a war zone and never knowing if I'd come back again, God said to me, Jesus Christ, who's resurrected over the dead, he's in heaven now and is on the right hand of God with angels, all angels, even the demonic, fallen angels, all angels, and all authority and powers, all powers are subject unto him. And I thought, all authorities, all power is subject to him. And I realized going in Vietnam, there's a lot of authorities. There's a lot of all kinds of angels. There's all kinds of power. But all powers are subject to him. And God gave me peace. I never will forget that hour, that moment I read that over the Pacific Ocean. All power being made subject, submissive to him. John 17, Jesus prayed to the Father and he said, you have control over all flesh, over all flesh. And though there was thousands, maybe millions even, that were trying to kill the Americans, the North Vietnamese, the communists, and I was going to be thrown right into the middle of it. I realized then God said, I've got all authority over every power, every bullet that comes out of any gun. I've got control of it. And the Lord reminded me, Jim, you couldn't kill yourself. Don't think somebody else can. He has numbered your days. Nothing, it says a wise person will number his days. And by God's grace, as a young person, the Lord helped me to really number my days and to even live for eternity. And I was all out for God. And as I look back in my life, when I realized that, I guess, proving my life before God, God knew, of course, he knows the future, but he tested me for years. I went into Greeley. I saw that work raise up. And then I saw others indirectly with Richard supporting him in the west coast of Colorado, where we saw other groups raise up. And seeing people saved. And then in Fort Bliss and Fort Polk, leading more men to Christ and wanting to reach the world for Christ. And it's kind of like, I think God gave me a few years and he said, all right. Jim went door to door, and every door with he and the team of believers to every door in Colorado Springs. He's for real. He means it. And God knew I meant it. God knew I meant it. And God then, he was working on me every day of my life. But as I look back, I think, I wasn't just put into a military boot camp and then advanced individual training and then the military. It was God's boot camp. God wanted to do something in my life that I couldn't discipline my own flesh. Sometimes, as the Bible says, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. God knew with me, because I'd lived in so much of the flesh, going out with girls and having my sports car and skiing when the snow fell and just having a great life. And beginning to share the gospel out of high school. I was going into college and was moving more in that direction, but still the discipline, probably one of the strongest things, the fruit of the Spirit, it's interesting, is love, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance, and self-control. Discipline is the bottom, it's the foundation for the fruit of the Spirit. If we don't have discipline, it says if you don't have discipline, you're like a city that has its walls broken down. Satan, the flesh, your own desires, other people, you can be affected and influenced. And I needed discipline, and God knew I needed discipline. I needed discipline not just in certain habits. I was virtually reading the Bible every day and sharing and witnessing, and had done a lot at that point. But even discipline in my mind, even realizing more and more God wanted to put the roots down deeper. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but God was flying me in to his spiritual boot camp to spend a year virtually every day thinking that today I might die. Every day, today I might die. Facing death every day. Paul said he faced death daily. But that has a refining effect. Believe you me, a refining effect. In fact, when I landed in Vietnam, I didn't know if we'd have to do the low crawl out of the airplane to get to a foxhole or something. Just had no idea. I didn't have to do the low crawl, but I was looking around, believe me. We got in there late, and I went into this building. They were registering us and putting us through everything to get us set up where we were going to be sent out. And while I had some time after I kind of registered in and all, I went by myself. I always like to get alone to pray. Jesus did that, and without thinking about it, I've just done that my whole life. Many times when I was going to speak, I couldn't find any place to get alone. I'd go into a restroom and shut the stall door, and I could be alone just to get alone to pray, and men all around and not knowing what was going to happen. And I got alone. I found a staircase. I went up to the top floor, and I went out on the roof of the building. And it was late at night. And I was standing out there by myself, looking out over Saigon. And I couldn't believe it. In the distance, I saw helicopters, U.S. military gunships, firing a blaze of fire like dragon fire, as it talks about in Revelation. It reminded me of that, with tracer bullets coming out of the helicopters. They were shooting down BC around the city, and it was really beautiful, except it was scary when you realize the reality. So there in the distance, just red blazes, just fire coming from the hill up in the sky, coming down into the ground, all around with helicopters, fire ships with their big guns. And then every once in a while, the earth would tremble from bombs that were dropping off 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away. I don't know exactly how far exactly, but just outside of town. And you could see the helicopters going, and I just stood out there and I was watching that. The earth would shake every time they drop a bomb. The gunships would coming down with fire. And God started me out. I said, God, I don't know what's going to happen, but I love you. I'm going to trust you. And the lot was cast into the lap. You heard my testimony when I was recruited. God miraculously, I missed by literally 4 days. I missed by my principal, my school would have gotten me out. Several miraculous things. God had control of my life. He had me there. I knew he had me there. As I was looking out that first night and seeing fire from heaven come down onto the earth and bombs go off, that was day number one. And I began to realize, what profit is it if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul? Why we live for momentary pleasures instead of the glory that's going to last forever. How stupid we are. How blind we are. We know it in theology. We know it in theory. We pray it. We think it. But does it really propel us? Paul said, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And if I'm here longer, it's only for your sake, for your joy, to build you up. Jesus, when he was here on earth, Romans 15, he said, I never did anything to please myself. You know, I've thought of this so many times, that once we see Christ, once we see Jesus, once we're in heaven, we'll never again, for all eternity, be able to sacrifice for Jesus. We'll never again, for all eternity, be able to suffer for Jesus. We'll never again, for all eternity, be able to exercise faith, because faith is the evidence of things not seen. We'll see Jesus. It won't be faith then. And now we can show great love, great devotion, as it says in Peter, as I was reading again. Though we don't see him, we trust him. What enormous opportunity. I'll never, for all eternity, get that opportunity again. I'll never get anybody for all eternity to slander me, to gossip about me, to accuse me, to attack me for Jesus' sake. I'll never. And those days, every day, facing death, between my headquarters at MACV headquarters and barracks where I slept, always carried a banana gun or an M16, realizing in the bush as I was just walking between in work, ones could come out and you'd be dead. And every day, and when I would be recording and sending tapes back to the United States, I didn't even think about it. Some of them and my family were almost, I guess, scared or shocked as they were listening, and I was sharing what was happening and how the Lord was moving, and they could hear bombs going off. They told me I never realized it in the background while I was speaking. Well, that was day one. And brothers and sisters, let God use you. Let God work in you. Let him take you where he wants to take you. Let him clothe you. Let him live through you. And let him take you to glory when he wants to. So I went back down, and if you recall from my testimony other past weeks, the chaplain that I was serving under, God miraculously put me with a chaplain in Fort Polk, and he wanted me to be in Vietnam with him because the chaplain's assistant, which I was, in the States was more administrative work, but in Vietnam, they were your life. You wanted somebody you knew you could depend on and that could defend you, because they'd be in the Jeep, you'd be driving the chaplain around, and if you were ambushed or anything, they would duck down and you'd have to rise up with your rifle and defend them, or well off whatever the enemy was. I was actually, one of the things I got was when I was in the Army, was a sharpshooter award, because I'd hunted a lot in younger days, deer and elk, and so I was a pretty good shot. And I think my chaplain also knew that. And I wasn't sure. He wasn't a very evangelistic Christian. If he was a Christian at all, I was a Lutheran, a nice guy, and I wanted to get, even though he got me over there, so I'll be sure and be with him. And he wanted me to report to a certain master sergeant that was going to hold me for him. I decided not to do that because I felt that I wanted to get with somebody that was born again if I was going to be a chaplain's assistant. So we'd be out in the front lines with a fellow believer preaching and sharing and baptizing. And I just visualized being right in the front line with guys and sharing the gospel with them, but with a Christian chaplain. So I didn't get with this chaplain. Anyhow, long story short, some general saw my MO and my records, and as you knew, the Lord, it was really the Lord. Not me. I don't know how it happened, except it was the Lord. I was over my company in basic and got the highest award there. In the same way in AIT was the top position there, and so my records looked, I guess, pretty good. And so this general took me out of the line and said, McCotter, I want you to come and be over the secret material at the MACV headquarters there in Saigon. And so it wouldn't have mattered what I would have tried to do. Again, God plucked me right out and said, this is where you're going. Of course, the general, if he says it, the sergeants and everyone else there, it doesn't particularly matter. And I didn't really want to go there. I wanted to be in the front lines where I thought I could affect more with the gospel. And I thought, this sounds administrative in the MACV headquarters, which is like the Pentagon in the United States. It's the headquarters, military headquarters in the United States. That was kind of the Pentagon. It was the war center, the headquarters for all the Vietnam War there in Saigon, called MACV. And I thought, oh, Lord, I don't want this. Again, it was me thinking I knew better than the Lord. But long story short, again, by God putting me in that position, and it wasn't the general, it was God. God just used the general, putting me in that position. And he put me over all the secret communication that came in to all the generals at the MACV headquarters, and all their secret mail or communication that went out into the field or wherever it went in Vietnam. And I was kind of the conduit, kind of like a glorified postmaster general, I guess you might say, except it wasn't very glorifying over there. But anyhow, all of it came through my office. And at first I was going through all this routine. I thought, how disappointed I was. But as time went on, I began to see, wow, this was really unique for the gospel. Because what happened was, as I began to lead people to Christ, they would get shipped out to different parts of Vietnam. And so anyhow, I'll get to how God was able to use that. But I'm still on the first night. So I went to the headquarters, and I spent that first night in a barracks. It was kind of dark. I couldn't see much. Laid in my little bunk bed. The next morning, I sat up and I looked at the tin wall. And in the tin wall had all these holes in it. And I said, why does it have all these holes? And the guy in the bunk next to me said, oh, those are bullet holes. You see, I arrived in Saigon about a week before the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was the Vietnamese holiday, their New Year holiday, one of their biggest celebrations that they have in a year. Every year they had their New Year holiday, Tet Offensive. And during that last Tet Offensive, just a few days before I got there, was when this offensive was. The VC had come in and they were shooting up the soldiers. And it was in the middle of the night. And I'm sure when I would have heard shots, and in fact, it was between midnight and 1 or 2 in the morning, so I would have been sound asleep. But once I heard shots coming in, I would have been laid down. I would have immediately sat up. When I stood up, those shots in the tin wall there would have come right through me. I would have been dead. And again, the Lord, I thought, They weren't shooting now, but the bullet holes with the sunlight came right in on me. And I thought, God, you planned it again. Wow, if I'd have just been 1 week earlier, I would have already been on my way back in a body bag. But you had that happen before I came. Already, I remembered the verse again in 1 Peter chapter 3. He has all power over all authority and over all powers. And I just quietly sat up that morning and said, thank you, Lord, as I looked through those bullet holes where the light was coming in on my body. I said, you protected me. And now it's your light. Your light is on me. Well, it was kind of mundane every day. Get up early, go to work, sending out, going with the secret material. And it was kind of interesting, just to tell you a little bit about the Tet Offensive, which was going to change the whole war. Prior to that, for months ahead of that, the Viet Cong, the enemy, were coming into Saigon in big potato trucks, and this was very common. Big trucks would come in for the foods and supplies in the city in Saigon. And Saigon had been a beautiful city. The French had been there before we were there, and it was kind of the Paris of Vietnam. So it was really a beautiful city. It had never been no military action there, and it was a place where there had been R&R, rest and recovery, where soldiers in Vietnam would come there because it was so nice and it was always peaceful. But the Viet Cong, this New Year's, they had planned to invade the city and basically to take over the American headquarters. And so they had been coming in on potato trucks, and they'd inspect them as they'd come into town, even though it had been safe and there had never been any military action in Saigon up to this point. And so there'd been mounds of potatoes, but underneath the potatoes would be Viet Cong, and they'd bring them in and at night. And then at night, the VC, the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, would crawl out of the potato trucks, and they'd be next to some cemetery, and they begin to go into cemeteries, and they would hide in the cemeteries. And this was literally going on for, I don't know, 1 or 2 months before the New Year's, where they were bringing hundreds and hundreds and evidently thousands of soldiers, Vietnamese, North Vietnamese in, and they were hiding in the cemeteries all over Saigon. And when New Year's Eve came, what do you do on New Year's? Just like in the United States, fireworks go off, and over there they didn't have any limits. So I mean, they were loud bursts of fireworks going off all over the place. Well, the VC then came out of the cemeteries at that time, and they started shooting up people. And of course, people couldn't realize, they couldn't hear the gunshots well, they didn't know what it was fireworks because of the fireworks. So it was a pretty clever strategy that they had. So they were coming out and shooting up people, and it took quite a while for anyone to realize what was going on. But the VC, their goal was to attack where I had gone into and was posted and stationed, was the MACV headquarters, because that's where all the generals were. And they knew if they could take that over, virtually getting all the generals, Westmoreland, Abrams, where they were the generals at that headquarters, if they could get all the generals, obviously the war would be over. The U.S. would have to capitulate. We would have gotten there. It'd be like taking over the Pentagon and all the generals that are in it, and just say this would have been it. They came out, when they came out of the cemeteries, the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, they also had their headquarters in Saigon as well. But the VC in the north, they had never been there before, never been in the city, and they went one direction where they thought was the MACV headquarters. But what it actually was the South Vietnamese headquarters. And they had a bit of a gunfight, but they swamped it. They took it over. And after they took it over, they realized, hey, this isn't the Americans, isn't the U.S. headquarters. This is MACV. This is South Vietnamese headquarters. Once they realized that, they were glad to do that, but they knew that wouldn't stop the war effort. they realized, hey, the MACV headquarters was the other direction. So then they turned around and started racing and moving their forces towards the MACV headquarters. It was during that time that the shots were going through our barracks, where if I would have been there, that would have probably ended my life on that specific spot where my bunk was. But that's where they were invading. The generals, they knew about the invasion. They knew they were going the wrong direction, and it gave the U.S. time to get the generals in the bunker. In the MACV headquarters, they had a big vault way down in the basement, and it locked off, had a lot of food, a lot of water, where the generals could stay there for, I don't know, probably months and survive. But nobody could get to them. And so all the generals raced in and to the headquarters, and all of them, they were down into the bunkers, and they sealed everything off. But of course, had the VC taken over. But by that time, even though the generals were down in the bunkers, because of the time it took for the VC to turn around from their getting the other headquarters and get over to MACV, by that time the American troops, we had enough troops to protect MACV, so they weren't able to overrun MACV headquarters and basically isolate the generals in the bunkers. Our men got in there just, I might add, in the nick of time. They still almost overran the MACV headquarters, but we finally got enough people there. We protected it. They did not take over the MACV headquarters, and we finally drove them back, drove them out, and saved the day. And the war then continued on. Had that, I don't recall in the newspapers, I wasn't in the United States then, but I don't think the newspapers really reported how critical it was and how close they came to having the war be ended right on that very day, that very night. But it did not. As I said, we drove them off. But Saigon was never the same after that. It was much more guarded, and of course, it had been shot up somewhat, but it was in a different situation. But the week I got in there, because there was the VC continued at times to invade, and Saigon was no longer a safe haven as it had been. That's why, as I said, I always carried a banana gun or an M16 just for my own safety, as all soldiers did, from our headquarters to where we slept. Well, anyhow, day and night, working sunrise to sunset. Sometimes I'd be on guard duty all night, and I'd use those times to pray, to memorize, and just to know the Lord was with me. But when I'd have a day off, I would go over to Tan Son Nhut. Tan Son Nhut was the air base right there, where all the new recruits that were coming into Vietnam, they would come into this place and they would register them through the facilities there. And when the young soldiers, after they were all registered in and everything, they would go out, and there was big benches under a big canopy. Basically, it was an enormous parachute where you could put, and sit in the shade, because it was hot in Vietnam. And but they would be in the shade under this big parachute canopy, and there'd be 100 or 200 or even more, several hundred soldiers sitting in these benches out there, waiting to be picked up in buses and other convoys to be taken to wherever they were going to go to in Vietnam, going further north or south or whatever direction. And so sometimes they would be out there for 2 or 3 hours waiting for the convoys to come in and pick them up. So when they were there, I would be out there when I had my days off. I would go out there and I would preach to all these soldiers. They were sitting all out there, 100 to 2 or 3 or 400 of them, and they'd be kind of like I and all of us that came in the first day, scared to death. Of course, most of them didn't know the Lord, so they didn't have the peace that I had and that Christians can have, but they were scared to death. And I would share the gospel and how Christ loved them and can save them, not only for this life, but for all eternity, and forgive them. And so exciting. So many soldiers came to know Christ. Again, if Satan can keep you busy so you never think you're going to die, that's exactly what he wants you to do. The cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things will come in and choke the word, so you just don't hear it, you don't see it, you don't think about it. And But these soldiers were facing death. Some of them knew they weren't going to live to see the sunrise, and or never get back to the States alive. And a certain percentage of them knew they were going to die. And so they were open and led scores of soldiers that came to know Christ. And I remember just preaching and sharing for an hour or two or however long until the convoy buses would come up. And I would get their addresses then. And but sometimes there'd be so many, and they'd get on the buses, and some had gotten saved, and a lot actually did, and didn't always have time to talk to all of them as individual, but as groups, and getting addresses as many as I could. And when they get in the buses and started to take off, still didn't have all of them, and some of them would have their heads out the window shouting out their address, and I'd be walking beside the bus as it was slowly taking off, writing down addresses, as many as I could get that I had not already gotten, that I would be writing to them. And I remember walking beside the bus, getting address. When the bus would go faster, I was running, trying to get as many as I could, and got scores of addresses. And I did that many times as the buses were leaving and taking them out to every parts of Vietnam. But you see, here I thought if I could go out and be there, that would be the best. But it wasn't the best, because I was at the place where they were coming in, and I could reach them all with the gospel. And not only that, God had a general take me and say, I'm going to put you over secret material. So I had a position where, with the secret material, or the secret communication, I would, on a regular basis, kind of like Paul, who would write follow-up letters to the churches or to the Christians that he led to the Lord. I did this. I'd write a general letter, like and I'd write it regularly to my new brothers in Christ, and I'd do it at least once or twice a week, and I'd send it out through my secret communication pouches to all the soldiers. So literally overnight they'd get my letters. And being in the office there, I had a copy machine, so I could make hundreds and thousands of these. So I'd write the letter, print up hundreds and thousands of them, put them in all the secret bags going out. So directly, this private or whoever it might be would get a secret document, and it would be delivered to him immediately, and it would not be lost. And he would open it up, and it would be from me, sharing with him different things wherever they were at, giving an assurance of salvation, more gospel verses, how to grow in Christ, to read the Bible. And so God put me in that unique situation. If I'd have been out in the field, I would have been with some company and could have reached them for sure by the grace of God. But being where I was able to reach the soldiers all over Vietnam. All over Vietnam. And I thought later, God, you are so amazing. You are just amazing. And I said, Lord, use me, whatever. And I never thought he was doing things the best way. But as I turned around, I realized he always did things the best way. I remember one little Catholic boy, I think his name was Eddie Bufford. There were so many. But I remember him especially because he wrote a letter back to me. And he said, Jim, he said, he was asking me about prayer. He was on a convoy taking those big tankers, trucks, and there was about, I guess, 50 of them or so, going down one of the Ho Chi Minh trails, or that they would drive down at night. And he said, he asked me, he said, Jim, I made it through. He said the convoy ahead of us got blown up, and a lot of the soldiers died. But he said our convoy made it through. The convoy that came later that night, it got blown up, and a lot of those soldiers died. The one in front of me and the one behind me, but I lived, he said. And he said I was on top of the cab of my semi after we got into the camp. And he said, Jim, was it all right if I prayed laying on my back on top of the cab? He said he was a Catholic, and he kind of thought he had to have a certain formal way to pray. He wasn't sure if it was sacrilegious. So he's asking me, is it just a young convert? Was it all right if I lay on my back in the cab and pray on my back, looking up at the stars? He said I was looking up at the stars that God made that night and thanking him for saving me. And And his letter was so touching. And he said, tomorrow night we're going to be going back down. He said, Jim, pray that we make it through. And when I get back, I'll write you again. And I wrote a letter directly to Eddie. And I said, brother, I love you. I said, brother, you can pray in any position you want. Lay on top of your cab, lay under your cab. It doesn't matter. Jesus hears you. And I continued to share some things with him. I said, I love you, brother. And I said, I'll see you when you get back tomorrow. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. Tomorrow came. Never heard from Eddie again. His convoy got blown up. He's in heaven. But God used that time in Vietnam. Every day, every day, every day, I faced death. And I wasn't in a firefight all the time, but the ground shook most every day from bombs every night, gunships firing tracer rounds coming down, and walking through where I walked, there was a brush area that always was sensitive where anybody might be, but I was trusting God. But I was thanking God for what he did, saving guys, letting me preach to hundreds, thousands, literally. And one guy that got saved was in Bien Hoa. He got sent out to Bien Hoa. Bien Hoa was, I don't know, maybe 25 miles away, but it was outside of Saigon. And because I was kind of under the generals on the MACV headquarters, I had special permission to get a motorbike. And it's not like I had it particularly for fun and games, because I didn't have that much time for fun and games, and I wasn't into fun and games anyhow. Any free time I had, I was getting with guys or working with guys or preaching the gospel under the parachute where the recruits were coming in. But I had this motorcycle that I was able to get, a little Honda. I think it was a 90 cc's, but at sea level, 90 cc's, I think that thing would go 50, 60 miles an hour. And but as a GI, I had to get a helmet. And the only helmet I could find was this kind of white helmet that I had on me, that if an MP saw me without that on, I'd have been in trouble. So I had the little white helmet. And in Saigon then, there were some cars, but 90% of them were bicycles or scooters or little motorcycles like mine. I mean, it was just packed, unbelievable. And at that time, it's changed since then, but that's the way it was then. Anyhow, I used that motorcycle to get around to different guys that I was following up with. And this one fella was responding. He responded to the gospel, was growing, and I had a day off, and so I wanted to get over to Bien Hoa to follow up with him. Got in my Honda motorbike, zoomed out in the middle of the day. It was a nice, beautiful day, and I got there with no problem, and spent a great time with him, and I will forget. And was planning to get back before it got dark, for sure. Because it would have been really dangerous. Anyhow, long story short, we got so involved, and I was even, I think, with some other guys sharing, and time got away from us. And by the time I finally broke away, and I hated to break away. I mean, guys, just this was real love. This was all they had, was the fellowship of the saints, and in this case, myself. And I hated to leave the brother, but I said, I've got to go, brother. And so, long story short, the sun had already set, and it had gotten dark. But I had to get back, because I had to get to my base, because I had to work early the next morning. And so I had to get back that night. So I took off at night and was just rejoicing that I was with this brother, praying for him as I was going along about probably 40, 45 miles an hour on this road. But going back, it was I remember I didn't have glasses, and the bugs were at night were so bad. It was so hard to see. At daytime it wasn't bad, and I didn't have the glasses, but I somehow didn't. I might have had sunglasses, but I wouldn't have been able to see with them on. So I just remember that it was really hard to see with the bugs and all. And the road was even hard to see. There was no lines on the road. It was an asphalt road, because that was a major road between Bien Hoa. A lot of military would go from Saigon to Bien Hoa. And but But as I was going down that road at night, could hardly see the markings, but I was zooming along. Just all of a sudden, out of the right side, as I was going along, choom, 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 bullets, zing, 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 front and behind me. I heard them going. I took my little motorcycle and I turned that handle so far I almost turned it off. I think I got it up to 60 miles an hour. I dropped my head and I realized I've got a white helmet on. I'm a sitting duck, and literally bullets. I heard them zinging past my body. And with the hand on the throttle, full speed, I grabbed and unhooked the helmet. I pulled it off, and I was able to slide it down into my fatigue. I think somehow, I don't know how I did that actually. Maybe unbuttoned a couple of the buttons, got in my fatigue, stayed down the whole way as bullets were zing, zing, zing going by me. And I was going all out, and I just thought, oh God, I was just calling out to the Lord to save me, like Peter when he was drowning. It would be a miracle if I got through this. There was Viet Cong not just too far out of Saigon, between Bien Hoa and Saigon, and I was their target. Well, I wasn't thinking at that time about all the verses that I had remembered, but I was calling to the Lord for sure. But you know, God had control of every power, every bullet. He let them come in front of me, behind me, over me, under me, around me, but not one hit me. And after a while, I got out of range and it stopped, but I was still laid down on that bike with full speed, probably at least 55, maybe 60. And I didn't let up. At that point, I did not let up. I didn't put my helmet back on either. And I had about another, I don't know, maybe 10 miles or so to get to Saigon. And so I was just down zooming with my helmet not on too. It would have not been as easy to see. And no more shots. And I just thanked God as the wind was going past me, and I was going fast, but I had peace. I said, God, you delivered me. And I think I thought of those verses then at that point in time. And I just kept going full blast. Well, when I came out of Saigon, there was a straight open highway. But at night, and I didn't know this guy, I'd never come out and come back at night before. At night, what the U.S. soldiers do so that they don't get ambushed, they roll out big rolls of barbed wire. So no cars or vehicles or motorbikes can zoom in fast and ambush them. So they roll those big rolls of barbed wire, and it make it kind of like a maze. So you have to go around like an S to get through. So you have to slow up. Obviously, that's the point, to slow up so they wouldn't be ambushed by a lot of VC or Viet Cong. Well, I didn't know that. I'm laying down on that baby, on that motorbike, going full speed, and my eyes, I can hardly see what's ahead of me. It was pitch dark, and all of a sudden, I did have a light on the bike that came on, but it wasn't very good. But anyhow, all of a sudden in front of me, I saw the barbed wire. I thought, I didn't really have time. I didn't have time to hit the brakes. I literally focused to somehow go through this, and I didn't think of any of this at the moment. But as I look back, I should have just been shredded. There'd have been no way. Again, this was an angel. It says in Peter that an angel, he has authority over the angels, because I went, I went through that. I wasn't particularly an Evel Knievel driver, a motorcycle rider, but somehow, and I still remember, I just mentally, I was just going to drive through it, but I would have assumed my tires should have gone out from under me, but they didn't. Somehow the Holy Spirit, an angel of God, just literally had my tires stick to the ground, so I could turn almost 90 degrees, and I was going fast. I might have dropped 5 miles an hour, but I was probably going at least 50, 45 or 50. I might have been going 45, but typically you would have had to slow down to at least probably 25 or 30 to get through there. I went, "Meow, meow, meow," and went through the other side, came out, and there it was. It was still quiet and dark. and and I and I was just, I thought, oh my God, how did you do that? I knew that was an absolute miracle. And it was not only a miracle that I got through it, I didn't think about it until later that another miracle occurred. Why the US Army didn't shoot me, because they were there off to the side, and anybody trying to ambush them, they would have shot them, and there was no way they would have known that I was a soldier. My uniform was dark. There was no light. I was on a motor scooter, just like thousands of Viet Cong drive. I had no helmet, so that didn't, and they never wore helmets, so I wouldn't have been identified as a soldier. I don't know if they were sleeping, or maybe God did. Maybe He put them to sleep. But I could have very easily been shot. Most likely, I would have been shot by the American soldiers if somebody zoomed through that fast and didn't stop. Boom, they'd have been shot. But I went through that, and I thought of that even. So I was right, and I just kept going, and I thought, oh, Lord, your days are numbered, and you are indestructible until your time is up. Well, God was working in my life. Every day was different, but it was exciting because of leading people to Christ. There's only one life, will soon be over. Only what's done for Christ will last. I had some other things that happened that I'm going to share next Thursday, before I left Vietnam, that were absolute, again, miracles. But I'm going to close off today just saying, brother, sister, I hope you realize, I just hope you realize that He is watching you not only every day, every moment of every single day. He says, I will never leave you, and I'll never forsake you. And He was with me. He was with me today. And I love Him for it. And I love you guys. Because He loves me, I love Him. Because He loves me, I love you. I love you. See you tomorrow. Questions, answers, any question you have about anything, we'll be answering it tomorrow. God bless you. Love you. Love Jesus. Read your Bible.